because they were, we all know, they were discriminatory against Kashmiri women. That they were discriminatory against the weaker sections of our society. And more importantly, that created a kind of mindset and a paradigm of separatism or political corruption, and also enabled our neighbor Pakistan to flee the radical Islamic movement in Jammu and Kashmir, which again, as most of you know, resulted in genocide and exodus of Kashmiri Pandits in 1990. And that community is still in exile, still kind of refugees in their own community, in their own country, so to say. So that has been the scenario of today's Kashmir. But then there's a good side of today's Kashmir, a new era, which is the era of where you have all the laws of Indian Parliament applicable to J&K. You have a new opportunity for growth of Kashmir. You have new opportunity for business investment in Kashmir, and a kind of, hopefully, a new hope for the children, youth of Kashmir to compete out in this world in a different era. But along with this scenario, we have the other scenario about Kashmir as well, which is the scenario that we still have Kashmiri Pandits in exile. We still have them as refugees in their own country. And we haven't seen so far any tangible roadmap for the return with security of Kashmiri Pandits to their homeland, Kashmir, the indigenous people of Kashmir, Kashmiri Pandits. And that is one lingering issue out there. The other part, which is that there is continued Islamic terrorism in Kashmir even today, obviously augmented, facilitated by neighboring Pakistan. But that is still causing a kind of sense of insecurity, which obviously is not good for, if you want to attract investments into J&K state, if you want to create employment for the youth, or if you want to create an overall new secure era for Jammu and Kashmir. So that's still one issue there. The third one is kind of, which is not really talked about much, but I have to be honest here to touch upon that. And that is that the politics of Jammu and Kashmir for decades has been artificially put in this paradigm of Hindu India and Muslim Kashmir kind of binary. And it has been perpetuated for almost generations, as so much so that a common man on the street secretly believes in it, and which has resulted in a kind of distrust in the common Kashmiri Muslims, I must say, or insecurity in certain respects, because this ideological made-belief religious binary has taken roots. And it's astonishing that in today's world, which is driven by fast pace of science and technology progressing every minute, and new challenges to world economy, a new world where information age has taken over, a new world where competition in each sphere is the real rule of the game. In that world too, we still have that medieval kind of binary of Hindu and Muslim distrust and intolerance there. And that intolerance towards Kashmiri Pandits or minorities in general, including Sikhs or even Harijans, is one more lingering issue, an underlying issue, which also needs to be addressed if we want to change the paradigm about Kashmir. So these are kind of several issues which I think hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss today, and we have very eminent speakers to address this. So what I want to do today is, for this session, we will have kind of two stages today. Stage one would be where we would have each of our panelists summarize their thoughts and perspectives on the topic that I discussed just now. And also in the second part, we will go more towards a kind of informal, a conversation-based discussion on some of those points with our panelists. So to get started, let me just first start to introduce the audience to our distinguished panelists who I'm very, very fortunate to have and very thankful to them all. Let me briefly introduce in a few keywords each of the panelists for this virtual global conference. First, we have Jeevan Zutshi. He is the founder of Indian American Community Federation. He is GKPD founding member and California coordinator for GKPD. He is an author, and he's originally an engineer by training. Then we have Mr. Mir Junaid, a young leader from Kashmir. He is president Jammu and Kashmir Workers' Party. He is currently Sarpanch in Kupwara, Kashmir. He's an author, a Kashmiri activist, and a lawyer by training. Then we have Aarti Tikku Singh. She's a senior journalist and columnist, has been senior assistant editor with the Times of India, and I think currently is, has served as foreign and strategic affairs editor, and obviously she's trained in journalism and international affairs. Then we have Shazia Ilmi, who is a senior TV journalist and a BJP leader. She has produced films and documentaries. She's a member of the International Association of Women in Radio and Television. Then we have other esteemed panelist, Dr. Amjad Ayub Mirza. He's originally a human rights activist from Mirpur. Dr. Mirza is a British commentator, author, columnist, and host of TV show Kashmir Focus. Last but not least, we have with us Dr. Surinder Kaul, who is the founder of GKPD, has previously been GKPD International Coordinator, and also has been previously president of Kashmiri Overseas Association, is a distinguished community leader and a physician by training. On a lighter note, we have today doctors, engineers, lawyers, journalists, activists, leaders, and Sarpanch in the house. So we certainly are in safe hands today. With that brief introduction, I just want to invite each one of you to kind of get started with your own summarized version, or I can call it opening statements. So to get started, I would like to first invite Jeevan Zutshi to share with us his take and on some of the issues that we discussed. Jeevan Ji, floor is yours.
Good morning from California. And again, I would like to welcome you all. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us. Several months back, when I read an opinion column by Mr. Junaid Mir, I was very fascinated. So much so that I included his opinion column in my book, which was released yesterday. My book is titled The Earth on Trial, The Visible and Invisible Enemies. I wrote it during the pandemic lockdown, reflecting on many things which were on my mind, like the virus, the Black Lives Matter movement, and of course, the Kashmir conflict. I've also included a quote in my book from our senior journalist, Aarti Tikku Singh, who was invited to speak at the congressional hearing in United States last year. It was, I think, October, I forgot the date, but I was also present there. She said that the United States House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing was prejudiced, biased, and a setup against India and Pakistan's favor. She continued to say the congressional hearing was completely prejudiced against 15,000 Kashmiri Muslim civilians who have been killed by Pakistan. It was prejudiced against 300,000 Kashmiri Pandits who were ethnically cleansed from Kashmir in 1990. It was prejudiced against over 700 Kashmiri Pandits who worked here in Kashmir in 1990. I think this says it all. Thank
Hi,
you,
Ram.
Junaid
How are
Mir
you?
Saab and Aarti ji for joining us today.
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you again for participating in this civil society dialogue for way forward towards a vibrant, inclusive Kashmir. You know, I think for creating a vibrant, inclusive Kashmir, it's important to correct the false narrative, which has been instilled through decades of disinformation. Let me tell you about this meeting we had this last Friday with a California legislator. Shockingly, he said that Kashmir has been occupied by India and India does not treat its minorities in Kashmir equitably. He even challenged the accession. And I politely had to tell him that where is he getting his information from? He's a friend, and he definitely, he said that he's not going to be part of any legislation or anything, if at all it ever comes on the floor here at the state level. But he didn't seem to be happy about anything, about the BJP, about current administration. So basically, he has been fed with wrong information. And unfortunately, that is the big problem that we are facing right now. You know, when Kashmiris say that Kashmir was always independent, this is historically incorrect. Kashmir was only independent till 1587, when the last independent ruler, Yusuf Shah Chak, was deposed and exiled by Mughal Emperor Akbar, who incorporated Kashmir into the Mughal Empire. Later, it passed under Afghan, Sikh, and Dogra rule, and ultimately came under the British. Maharaja Hari Singh was only nominally independent, but like other princely states in India, the real ruler of Kashmir was the British, who had their army there. And for those who challenge instrument of accession and Article 370, they must know that the instrument of accession was the only legal document to be signed by the princely states. There was no other document. Maharaja Hari Singh signed it on 26th October 1947, and Lord Mountbatten signed it on 27th October 1947. So the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to Indian domain was complete and final. There shouldn't be any ambiguity on accession. And now Article 370, reference to Article 370 as a precondition to instrument of accession is hype. Similarly, whatever provisions Maharaja had before instrument of accession was signed, it became null and void. Instrument of accession was signed on 26th October 1947, and the process of Article 370 started in 1949. In my opinion, Article 370 was removed last year exactly the way it was introduced. The removal process was more detailed, which followed all constitutional provisions, including debates and voting. At the time of partition, the new nation state of Pakistan claimed that Kashmir was an unfinished task of division. Pakistan was a place created for Muslims. The founder, Ali Muhammad Jinnah, described Kashmir as an unfinished task of division. Bhutto took it further by proclaiming 1,000-year war with India. If this was not enough, General Ziaul Haq's doctrine of 1,000 cuts to bleed India fostered and nurtured separatism, terrorism, and fundamentalism, thus making Kashmir what it is today. Consequently, Pakistan became a player by supporting this deep-seated separatist agitation with finance, training, and allegedly boots on the ground. The beautiful valley of Kashmir became a bed of Islamic terrorism, and the campaign of intimidation and harassment worsened in late 80s with growing influence of the straight-laced interpretation of Islam propagated through Wahhabism. To completely Islamize Kashmir, Pakistan was able to capitalize on this by financing, arming, and training militant groups across the border, and ethnic cleansing of the Kashmiri Pandits was undertaken on January 19, 1990. No one can deny those facts. Moving forward, I believe that first of all, we have to fight this disinformation and this false narrative that has been created has to be corrected. And I believe that the ordinary Muslim majority in the Valley of Kashmir have started recognizing that the dynasty rulers in Kashmir have bungled up the state through corrupt practices. They recognize that the poor segment of the society wants to get stability, security, and employment. And many like to be called Indians while they feel that that would be their real identity. And don't forget that they also have been very tired of some of these unscrupulous politicians in the past 72 years. Many lives have been lost, and healing must continue. We ask citizens to create harmony and live within confines of law. The indoctrination of Muslim youth must discontinue in mosques and other places in Kashmir. In the past few years, there has been transformation in the direction of thought process of India. A developed India creates fear in their minds. Such forces will also not want India to be strong and vibrant. The opening up of the local economy to outside actors will be akin to India's liberalization movement of 1991, when it opened up its economy and integrated with the outside world. The economic focus of the state can now be broadened beyond tourism and agriculture. Industrialization can slowly expand its prominence in the local economy. And the elimination of the spatial status and more centrality of governance should beget higher availability of economic opportunities and wider avenues of growth for the people of Kashmir who have long been denied of the same. And last but not the least, we must promote pluralism in the state so that all communities can live together as they did before. Pakistani trained militants created mayhem and forced Kashmiri Pandits to leave Kashmir Valley. And this can happen through intra-Kashmiri dialogue, exchanging programs of students, writers, artists, and they help in reconnecting and reintegrating hearts and minds of the people. And other recommendations are like promotion of art, culture, modernizing libraries by providing internet connectivity and modern education aids to turn children into a productive asset for the community. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jeevanji, for sharing that insightful perspectives. You touched upon a lot of broader areas. Hopefully we'll get some time to touch upon during our discussion on some of those points. So from here, I just want to go to Mr. Mir Junaid from Kashmir to have him share his perspectives, his views on the topics that we are discussing today. Mir Junaid, the floor is yours.
Adab, a very good evening to the organizers, the honorable panelists, and the wonderful audiences joining us today from different places across the globe. I feel honored to having been given a place among the panelists for today's wonderful seminar, which is not only of strategic and intellectual significance, but also presents a picture of enthusiasm and the optimism with which Kashmir is being waved by India right now. I'm very excited to speak on this important topic as we have been in need of an exhaustive, brainstorming over the issue for a long time. we're right now in a nascent phase of new Jammu and Kashmir, where the political drama of the past is being replaced by a democratized political ground. Socially, J&K still remains in a cocoon which had become rigid over the past 30 years. I often blame isolation of Kashmir as a major reason for the predicament that it has been in for the last 30 years. The pseudo Islamization of the politics in Kashmir done by Pakistani proxies in another factor which has complemented the isolation factor in the process. And the need for a decisive step was long overdue in Kashmir when it came to, ending all the doubts about where Kashmir belonged and what Kashmir was. Now that we are in the new phase of J&K, the way forward to make Kashmir a vibrant, inclusive society is a challenge on multiple levels. Politically and legislatively, the work has been done, but the challenge lies in realizing the great dream of the happy Kashmir, the Kashmir which me and the generations that follow me have not seen. In this age of information and communication technologies, I believe there is a big possibility for a lot of things to be achieved. But first, we need to address the part where inclusion becomes a conceivable goal when it comes to Kashmir. There are few practical considerations that we have to make before making any plans for an inclusive Kashmir. We'll be dealing with a generation of both Kashmiri Muslims and Pandits who have become adversaries when it comes to the political orientation of the both. You see, politics and politics, has emerged as the sole point of confluence for both the groups, which is highly undesirable in this case. The history, it cannot be denied, and the wrongs that have been committed against the Pandits are definitely gruesome, and we have to be, we should be we should apologize the Pandit community, because when I hear these the things which has been done in the wrong by the Pakistan supporters in Kashmir, or by their lapdogs in Kashmir, I mean, for that, I mean, I as a young gentleman, on behalf of my young generation, I'm very, very, very sorry. You see, the journey of Pandits since the exodus, has been one long tragedy which has no match in the history of mankind. There are generations that have had to grow outside their homes and have had to adopt to unbearable climates, alien cultures, different foods and habits, and the identity has been damaged to a great level. The loss in Kashmir is also very significant, as the generations that have come after the insurgency in Kashmir have been breastfed with venom against India, which is in continuation of the emotional propaganda of Pakistan, which has been so deep in the genes of Kashmiris over past 30 years. We're facing, at this point of time, a paradox where politically the two groups from same race majorly are having opposite political orientations, which are further aggravated by the faiths the two groups follow. And the separation has eroded the plural fabric of Kashmiri culture, which can be revived only through empathy. I was carefully listening to Zuchi Sab, he was mentioning the same. And the topic of Kashmiri Pandit exhorts is very close to my heart. And I'm not speaking as a politician when I refer to this topic. I sincerely and firmly believe that Kashmir is incomplete without Pandits because they are the essence of the diversity that Kashmir has been a home to. Our ancestors have shared feelings and love for each other for centuries. We have celebrated festivals together in past and even grieved over losses together. A 30-year separation now needs to end, but it needs to end in a manner where we see Muslims welcoming the Pandits back and the Pandits embracing their Muslims fellow Kashmiris as their own. And you see, nationality and nationalism are the prime guiding forces for the politics that we must support. But sociologically, it's time to extract, some amount of space for each other now. The future of a possible Pandit return depends upon the materialization of the numbers of Pandits who want to permanently shift back to their real homes, and their return requires, a sufficient groundwork done by the government by first, enabling the contact of these people with their fellow Kashmiris who are currently living in Kashmir. Then the issue of security shall only arise if there is a political picture given to this process. This is more than just a political issue for every Kashmiri. And the insurgency times were the times when Pakistan's policy of pushing Kashmir into criminal darkness was its peak. The political orientation of Kashmiri Muslims is in need of a lot of reform, but the return of Pandits has to be made immune to this orientation. You see, you do not have to, live outside your home just because you believe in a different God. And this is a common belief of every Kashmiri. The plural and tolerant spirit, still exists within every Kashmiri who is not a political proxy of Pakistan. And believe me, that is the larger chunk of Kashmiri Muslims. The fundamental problem lies in the political views, and those cannot take a backseat for some times as the integration of Jammu and Kashmir with the rest of India has been completed. The focus now must not be on what Pakistan does and how it has corrupted Kashmiri Muslims, but now it is time to win the Muslim over by love and compassion. This can be realized only when a more educated and exposed Pandit returns back home to Kashmir. I believe that the key to reform in Kashmir lies in the Pandit return, because being Indian can only be made more comprehensive by first-hand exchange of thoughts and observance. The sincerity with which India is loved by a Pandit needs to be shown to a fellow Muslim for him to identify himself with the union more. I don't want to make much of your time, and would like to conclude with a hope and wish to see Pandits returning to place they belong to and help in nation building process in Kashmir. Thank you so much for patiently listening me. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Junaid, for very upbeat and very honest kind of touching upon some of both the painful and the upside part of Kashmir. And I think we'll probably get more chance to discuss a little more. Thank you for that. Really welcome you. You are part of our younger generation or youth of Kashmir. So it's wonderful to have you here. From here, I just want to move on to invite Aarti Tikku Singh to share her perspectives and views on the topics that we're discussing today. Aarti, the floor is yours.
Namaskar. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to Kashmiris across the board, not just in India, but abroad as well. And thank you for putting this together, because I think after the historic decision of reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir last year and the nullification of Article 370 and 35A, it was incumbent on Kashmiri society to come together and have this dialogue with each other. I want to congratulate Junaid Mir for bringing in a perspective that generates a lot of hope for people like me, for observers like me who watch Kashmir closely and who also watch the neighborhood closely, especially Pakistan, where we see religious fundamentalism taking another level altogether, where people are coming out in droves, in huge numbers, not just denigrating and lashing out at minorities, sectarian minorities in Pakistan, but also in a way messaging the world that Pakistan has arrived as a strong Islamist country where Islamism as of today rules the roost. So for Junaid Mir to talk about inclusive Kashmir, for Junaid to say that Kashmiri Hindus and Kashmiri Muslims need to come together and need to address each other's issues with a lot of empathy, I think makes a lot of sense and also brings a lot of optimism. But having said that, I want to address the main subject of the discussion today, which is the way forward for Kashmir from here on. And I think before we discuss the way forward, we need to know what the way is today and where we stand today. Long ago, Professor Abdul Ghani Bhatt, a prominent Kashmiri Muslim separatist, he told me that the biggest problem in Kashmir or for Kashmiri separatists was that they were confused about the question that where will they get buried once they die, whether it's going to be India or Pakistan. I think that confusion has been settled once and for all by the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir and the nullification of Article 370. Because as of today, I think the older generations in Kashmir and in Kashmiri Muslim society particularly have finally understood and finally recognized somewhere deep down in their hearts, even if there is no public acknowledgement, even if there is no public dialogue happening within Kashmiri Muslim society, I would say deep down in their hearts, they do recognize that that Kashmir for all times to come is completely and fully integrated with the rest of India as it was and has been a part of India for more than 5,000 years, or ever since the idea of Bharat or India or Hindustan, call it whatever you can, the geographical continuum, the geographical, not just the geographical continuum, but the cultural continuum from the Himalayas down to south to Kanyakumari. It's a one large, broad cultural unit. And I think that recognition is there deep down in the majority of Kashmiri Muslim society. And the proof for that is the fact that nobody really came out on the streets for the Kashmiri Muslim leadership that was detained last year after the state was reorganized. So that's a big indicator that Kashmiri Muslim society, the majority of it, I would say, is sensible and wise and would prefer an inclusive society, would prefer, and I think also recognize that their fate is sealed with the cultural, historical roots of India. But I think the issue here is that even though the majority in Kashmir may be aware and also in a way reconciled to this fact after having been told lies for the last 70 years by their leadership, that Kashmir was going to be part of either an independent state or going to be part of Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The problem today is that it's the younger generation that is completely disconnected from this reality that has been sold on the religious fundamentalism, that also has been, I would say, deliberately and consciously uh, deprived of the idea of coexistence, communal harmony, deprived of the idea of pluralism and pluralistic India by the Kashmiri Muslim leadership. But I think this challenge, more than anybody else, Kashmiri Muslim society will have to address it on its own. I don't think Kashmiri Pandits, or for that matter, Government of India, or for that matter, anybody else can really sort this out for them. I think it really falls on their own shoulders to introspect and see where Kashmir has come from in 1947, when Kashmir stood up against the idea of Pakistan. It stood up against Pakistani raiders and tribals, and stood by India, stood by the idea of India. From that point to the point in 1990 when people who were on the streets carrying AK-47s, raising the slogans of Nizam-e-Mustafa and Sharia and Islamic State. And this whole campaign, the fantasy or the chimera of Kashmir becoming part of Pakistan, part of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, is shattered today. It is not going to be a reality. And it's not because Pakistan has to do with something to do with this, but the fact that China has something to do with this. I think that recognition is there within the older generation of Kashmir, that in 1947 they had the option between India and Pakistan, but as of today, the option is not India and Pakistan. The option is that if they continue with this Islamist jihad, or continue with this campaign for a separate Kashmir, the choice would be essentially only one, and that is the Chinese Communist Party, which already has made inroads into Gilgit-Baltistan and Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. That should also I think tell us people who have tried to make this point in the last 30 years several times through their writings, the fact that China, through a China-Pakistan economic corridor, has already made inroads into Pakistan, and the fact that it is the specter today is that China will not only take the liberty and the autonomy or whatever little freedom people in POJK and Gilgit-Baltistan have, but if Kashmiris remain indecisive, and when I say Kashmiris, I'm talking about Kashmiri Muslim society, if they remain indecisive, and if they continue to peddle the narrative that the Kashmiri separatists and the Pakistani army peddled in the last 30 years, the future for them is going to be bleak. The future for their children is going to be bleak, because while the rest of the world is moving around them, and while the rest of India is moving ahead, they will remain stuck. And I think this is, as a citizen of India, as a state subject of Kashmir, as a native of Kashmir, it is my duty and responsibility to convey this message through this platform to Junaid and his supporters, and who then in turn can convey this message to the rest of their people in Kashmir, that the future holds a great deal of hope, provided Kashmir comes out of its confusion and the ambiguity that they lived in in the last 70 years. I will come back to other questions. I think I want to address one particular question about Kashmiri Pandits. I do want to say that genocide bill, anti-genocide bill should be a priority for not just Kashmiri Pandits, but also for Kashmiri Muslims, if there has to be reconciliation between the two communities. I think the demand should not only come from Kashmiri Pandits, but also from people like Junaid Mir, so that the ethnic cleansing, the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits that did happen in 1990 is not repeated. Thank you.
Thank you, Aarti, again for that insightful take on some of the lot of issues which obviously are pertinent to this situation. Thank you for sharing that with us. I just want to go on now to invite Shazia Ilmi to share her thoughts with us. Shazia, the floor is yours.
Mohanji, seems
I
that
don't see her on the panel
Shazia is not in the chat right now.
right now. So Mohanji, let's invite Dr. Amjad Mirza Saab, and then
Yes,
in the meanwhile.
I think she can join us later. Okay, let's go on. I think we will invite Dr. Amjad Ayub Mirza. So please share your perspective.
Thank you very much. And first of all, if you can tell me how much time I have,
Please go ahead.
for how long am I supposed to speak?
We will think about 5-6 minutes around that time to summarize your.
Okay, I'll put my stopwatch on. All right, thank you very much for having me on this webinar, and I have been in touch through WhatsApp and Twitter with most of you, and also with Junaid Mir. I have been in touch, and I've interviewed him on at least one occasion for our TV channel show, MA TV from London. Now, there are a few things that I think, because I come from Pakistani occupied Jammu Kashmir, so our perspective is could be slightly, I wouldn't say different, but slightly a perspective from afar. Now, first of all, I think that what we need to understand is that the root cause of the so-called Kashmir conflict. And the root cause, unless we address the root cause, we only become worshippers of facts, and we fail to delve deeper into the process that has led to the emergence of or the birth of those facts. And the fact of the matter is that this region of Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan, for centuries has been strategically and geographically very important for trade routes and also for access to different empires. I mean, it was Gilgit-Baltistan where three empires met, which is the British Empire, the Chinese Empire, and the Russian Empire. So there always was issues in this region. And the British, when the time of the partition of India came, the British did not want India to have direct access to Central Asia. And Pakistan was carved out of the living body of India in order to deprive India of that trade or geostrategic route. Now, because there are only 6 minutes and 2 minutes have gone past, so I can't delve deeper into that, but just to point out. Now, I think that the modern root cause of terrorism in Kashmir is Pakistan. And unless we address how are we going to deal with Pakistan and Pakistan homegrown terrorism and terrorist camps there, and the jihadi infiltration, which will not stop unless it is stopped. I think it's going to be very difficult to find a solution for Kashmir. Allah, 3 minute guzar bhi gaya. Anyway, so now I think that the Pandits, what happened to the Pandits, Muslims cannot be the spokesperson for the genocide of Kashmir, of the Kashmiri Pandits. It has to be led by the Kashmiri Pandit community itself. The Muslims cannot take over their campaign and say, okay, we are ashamed of ourselves or we are sorry. This is not enough. This is not enough. Sorry is not enough. Excuse me. What is required is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission should be formed, whether on government level or on a like kind of not NGO but kind of an NGOtic level. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission that properly identifies those elements that had facilitated the genocide of the Kashmiri Pandits, who had facilitated the exodus, the mosques, the Maulvis, the political element, the JKLF element. All of this has to be brought together, and a report has to be made public by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Of course, I think Muslim can be part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but it has to be led by the Kashmiri Pandits themselves. So now, so we have to understand that in Kashmir, we are dealing with a group of people who have an ideology, and their ideology is jihadist Islam. And not only that, they are armed. They are armed, and that is what makes them even more powerful. Now, to counter that ideology, we need to have a counter-cultural narrative. Unless we break their cultural, religious cultural hegemony and replace it with a new cultural hegemony, a cultural discourse, a cultural narrative, we cannot defeat them in the battlefield. Now, since 5.5 minutes have gone past, so in half a minute, I would just give a few suggestions. One of them is that in Kashmir, especially in Srinagar, Kash mein wahan hota, Bahral. In Srinagar, we should hold joint peace rallies every week to show the street power of those who want the conflict to be resolved, to show the common people in Kashmir and give them hosla, give them courage, give them confidence, give them this trust in peace rallies that yes, there is a force that is coming out every week on a weekly basis on the street with slogans for peace, who have rejected this violence. Then there should be joint peace committees. And these joint peace committees should have Kashmiri Pandits, Hindus or Sikhs as the leaders of these joint, and the Muslims should be behind them. This is the only way. You can't say, since we are the majority community, we are going to tell you how to get peace. No, peace can only be won by those who have been victims of violence. Secondly, and both of these things I think are important because we have to reconquer the space that has been taken from us, snatched from us by these jihadists. And also we should have Gupkar gang Murdabad rallies. We should come openly and reject this Gupkar declaration and Gupkar gang through rallies, keeping social distancing and wearing masks and whatever. So I think that I truly believe in what Aarti Tiku has said, and that the onus is on Kashmiris, and in Kashmir, the onus is on Kashmiri Muslims. Now, I don't think that this conflict is going to go away unless Pakistani jihadi terrorist camps are uprooted, unless by hook or by crook, I mean by negotiations or by the Indian army moving directly into Gilgit-Baltistan and POJK, recapturing their occupied territories and finishing off these terrorist camps. This problem is not going to go away, no matter how nice words or sweet tongue we use. It's not going to go away. Thank you. I've just gone about 2 minutes over. Oh no, 1 minute. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Mirza, being so frank and speaking the brutal truth about a lot of these issues. Thank you for sharing that. So do we have Shazia in by this
No,
time?
she texted me. She had an urgent thing to move out. She may join later, but let's continue right now.
Okay, so with that, let's go to the, I want to just invite now Dr. Surinder Kaur. I think, please touch upon your perspective and your take on some of the issues that we have been discussing today. So floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mohanji. First of all, it's a privilege to be amongst the esteemed panelists here, who we have been seeing every now and then in the media. But being part of the meet is really a privilege for me. Today is a special day because Junaid Mir, who comes from Kupwara and is a leader, and he was speaking, I felt a ray of hope. I was thinking that all the youth have been fed all the wrong information by the politicians who have bled Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir for all these 70 years. That is a ray of hope. And thank you so much, Junaid Mir sir, for speaking the truth honestly, boldly. You know, we all say that post August 15, 2019, Jammu and Kashmir has been completely integrated with India. I agree to some extent, but I think there is one component, a very strong component, which is missing. And what is that component? I say yes, territorial integrity has been in complete integration, but we all need to realize that we love Kashmir not because it's beautiful. We love Jammu and Kashmir not it's beautiful, because it has a rich civilization. And what happened in last 30, 35 years was an onslaught on this civilization. I don't define this civilization as a Hindu civilization or a Muslim civilization, but it is a common civilization for both Kashmiri Muslims, for Kashmiri Hindus, for Kashmiri all walks of life. So unless and until that civilization is restored, we cannot completely say that it has been completely integrated with India. That is a missing link, and that we need to see how it will proceed further. I feel definitely we all Kashmiris, Jammuites feel cheated by the politicians. And then the second element was the separatists. Well, they were following their agendas. But what hurts us is the civil society of Kashmir that Aarti Tikku Singh very nicely put in. I thought that she stole my ideas that I was going to speak. Yes, you know, the problem is that the civil society of Kashmir remain muted. Whatever they are good people, spiritual people, but unless and until they speak up, by de facto it will be seen that they are part and parcel of this agenda. I feel very confident that Junaid Mir Saab is speaking his heart. And this change has to happen. Kashmiri Pandits are not against Kashmiri Muslims. For anybody else, they have immensely contributed towards the building of the Union Territory, the state of, erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. And how they have been treated by selected people, and the tacit silence of Kashmiri civil society is what hurts us the most. Now, let us reflect on the politicians. What are they doing? Now, Article 370 abrogation was always in the interest of these political elites. They have exploited it. They have abused it to the hilt. They have divided people. They have divided communities just to be on the saddle of governance. And a simple example of a report from CAG, if you see that, it's not a report coming from BJP. It's not a report coming from Congress. It's not coming from any political parties. The CAG report has said that Kashmir, despite being 1% of the population, was receiving grants to the extent of 10%. In 16 years, every resident of Jammu and Kashmir, Government of India has spent 90,000 rupees as compared to Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh has just got in 16 years 4,000 rupees. You see the level how government of India has been trying to help the residents of Jammu and Kashmir. Where was that money going? What infrastructure, what educational policies, what institutions we have seen? All that thing was going to the select elite people. Similarly, the industry of terrorism. If that money would have been spent on the residents, the amount of money that was spent on this industry of terrorism, it would have been a very happy Kashmir, as put by Junaid Saab. I'm very happy that he used the word happy Kashmir. I'm going a little bit further, a happy index. Now, the lot of states, lot of countries are evaluating a metrics of happy index. What is happy index? Happy index is how happy is your family? And what does that family? Access to employment, access to health, access to governance, access to empowerment. All these things have been missing by these opportunists, and now they have ganged up again together just to protect their interests, not the interests of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Just to say that they have all the perks, they have lifelong perks, they can continue to bleed the state, they will continue to divide the people, and the civil society has to stand up. The sooner it happens, the better it is. Now, as regards Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, we are all here to work for the development of the people of Kashmir. And I know, Junaid Saab, you use that, I wish that Kashmiri Pandits, I don't know how many Kashmiri Pandits will come back. Let me clarify this. There is a craving for Kashmiri Pandits to go back. But I must say firmly that government of India has to make that happen, respecting the sentiments of the community. And recently, the community came together. They launched Global Kashmiri Pandit Business Foundation. And they want to invest. They want to contribute towards the development of the state of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So I mean to say, once the system, once Government of India makes plans about rehabilitation process, definitely you will see that Kashmiri Pandits will not lag behind. And definitely this voice has to come from the civil society of Kashmir, not the politicians, not the separatists, but the civil society of Kashmir. All Kashmiris will have to say that in one voice. And I know the tribunals we have talked about, anything, if there has the genocide and ethnic cleansing has been a biggest tragedy of independent India. And this cannot be brushed under the rug. There has to be injustices happen. There has to be tribunals so that it is not repeated again. Then our thing is that, we are small, minuscule community scattered everywhere. And it is very important for this community to sustain, to follow their roots. And we as Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora have been demanding that, it's very important for the community to stay together at one place so that we get that confidence, we get that level of security that we are together, nothing wrong will happen. I mean, say in a while we are making smart cities, we are expanding, every city is expanding, every place is expanding. I don't think this is a big deal. And all the voices like Junaid Mir, who believes in Indian Constitution, who believes in pluralism, who believes in coexistence, I will love to live with them. That will be the foundation of Naya Kashmir. And on that note, I conclude here, and back to you, Mohanji.
Thank you, Surendraji. Thank you for that insightful take on these issues. So do we have Shazia by any chance in or no? Okay, so
Let me check just a second.
Someone
No,
can send
I don't see her.
No,
I
she
think
isn't.
she has
She
an
isn't.
emergency.
Okay.
She's in?
No, she isn't.
Okay.
She isn't. Okay. So that'd be fine. So I just want to now go to the second part of this this wonderful brainstorming session in a conference here. This would be a little more based on a little bit more elaboration and discussion on some of the points which got discussed. I think I just want to, at this stage, draw attention to some of the key issues, which, by the way, most of the speakers have touched upon. First and foremost, I just kind of get reminded of the old saying, That is, those who choose to neglect history are bound to repeat it. What I mean by that is, I think we need to touch upon highlight some of the few points here. One is that somehow not many people seem to realize that Kashmir existed as a crown of Hindu civilization much before modern Pakistan came into existence, or even modern India came into existence. So it predates many of those players or what we really see today in media or in other kind of areas. The second point about historical thing is that the cross-border aggression against peaceful Kashmir by Pakistan trained and sponsored militia called Qabalis, which happened October 22nd, 47, it marked the birth of Kashmir problem. Because not only in terms of setting the tone for this cross-border aggression against Kashmir in general, but especially against minorities in Kashmir. But it resulted, as we know, into this divided Kashmir and so on and so forth, triggered the saga of Kashmir problem. But the lesson there we have to learn is that the minorities in Kashmir, particularly the Kashmiri Pandits, have a very legitimate concerns about security in Kashmir. These are not just fabricated or somebody is imagining it. Now imagine this community has undergone religious persecution almost right from 13th century onwards. They have undergone 7 exoduses from that place. And the most recent was the 1990. And as Junaidji touched upon, as many of you touched upon, we have to be truthful about the fact that the most gruesome violation of human rights in modern times happened in 1990 because of rape, murder, and finally forced exodus of Kashmiri Hindus and the genocide of them. It was, of course, a shame on Indian democracy. It was a shame on this claim of secularism of India. And it was shame on the ruling class of Kashmir. It was shame on the judiciary of India. It was shame on the journalism community in India. And not only India, not only Kashmir, but the entire world stayed silent when this genocide was happening. And that's the bitter truth. We need to talk about it. Now, the other part of this equation now comes in is that if we are talking about the return of normalcy or a new era of Kashmir, while as Surendraji rightly pointed out, whereas the integration is good, geographical integration is wonderful, returning businesses to Kashmir is wonderful, investment, all of those are very good things. We need to have them. But then there is that problem with regard to meeting of minds or so-called integration of minds, or I would say the paradigm shift, which has to happen. Now, I just want to kind of, it kind of boggles me many times that we seem to have forgotten one of the well-said thing about religion, which is that the true greatness of a religion is not determined based on how a religion treats its own followers, but it's really determined by how it treats followers of other faiths. And therein comes that birth of religious tolerance or celebrating a different paths of spirituality or different paths people want to worship God, well and good. But I think that has not really become a part of the Jammu and Kashmir thinking, or in Kashmir Valley particularly. Now, with that said, I think I just want to go back before I want to go to each one of you for a few questions, but I want a little bit elaboration from Surendraji because he spoke last on this issue. Surendraji, can you elaborate on, I want to get from you a feel about how do you feel about the actually roadmap of return of Kashmiri Pandits to their homeland? Because we have from one side, as we all talked about, security concerns, terrorism on one side. And I also know that very well-meaning different Kashmiri organizations have come up with very valid ideas or roadmaps, whether it's on Kashmir or whether it's security zones, or whether all ideas have been put forward there, which by the way, have all validity, and all of them are converging on a single theme that we want to have Kashmiris Pandits return to the homeland in a very secure and assured fashion. So could you just elaborate about your vision on that point?
Yeah, thank you, Mohanji, for giving this opportunity and asking a very pertinent question. You know, I understand that the community has been bruised, the trust has been eliminated, and not only since last 30 years, this has been last for 700 years. Now, the thing is that all Kashmiri Pandits, most of the Kashmiri Pandits, they crave for Kashmir, they want to connect with their roots, but the way things happened, it cannot be the same place again unless and until certain measures are being taken. You know, the correction of the wrongs is very important for governance from historical perspective, from futuristic perspective, so that the wrongs doesn't happen. So for that, we need to see that what happened as Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, we have collected about list of 1,600 deaths, which is peer-reviewed, validated, along with the addresses and the day of incident that things have happened. So it's not the question about 200, 300, 400. So it's about 1,600 deaths, targeted killings. Then leave aside those who lost because their lives because of other unnatural things. So it is very important because India has to also show that, you know, the foundation is the Constitution of India, and if some wrong happens and if they do not acknowledge that, that means that the governance or the law of the land goes to the back seat. So this is very important for government of India to recognize, the people of Kashmir to recognize, and basically we are asking for a tribunal that whatever has happened, what happened, who were culpable of this crime, and take corrective actions on that so that it builds the confidence amongst us that, okay, this is the first step. Secondly is the confidence building measures. We have seen the status of our temples and shrines all over Kashmir, how badly they are, in bad shape they are. Many of them have been encroached, many of them have been looted and graffiti written there. So that is not acceptable. These are the symbols of civilization. They have to be restored. And Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora is working on that to see how best all these temples and shrines are put back prior to as they were in 1990s prior to that. Now, as regards rehabilitation process is concerned, Kashmiri Muslims have to realize that, you know, we don't have anything. We want them to be prosperous, but we have to be firm that we are at the verge of extinction. The small community which has immensely contributed towards India, which has immensely contributed to the development of Jammu and Kashmir, is at the verge of extinction. And the best way to protect this from exterminating is let them be at one place, let them grow, let them develop that confidence. And that people, whether they are Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, who believe in Indian Constitution, who believe in coexistence, who believe in mutual respect and caring and sharing, they will be always part and parcel of that. So these are the 3-4 things basically that we need to start working on. We can have a civil dialogue, and if that comes from a civil society, that will be really wonderful, and that will be the ray of hope for a prosperous, progressive Kashmir, where there is justice for all, equality for all, and that is my answer. Back to you, Mohanji.
Thank you on that one. I think I want to further dig into this on this issue, because I know based on what I heard responses from people who are attending it, as well as people before this conference, I think this is one of the burning issues which a lot of Kashmiri Hindus have in mind, and also the issue with regard to the hardships of some of the Kashmiri families, few hundreds who stayed back in Kashmir. And I think that's another one hanging issue out there. But I think at this stage, I want to invite first Junaid ji and later on Aarti ji on this issue. So the question, which is basically the same question put in a different way, that if supposing we imagine tomorrow, if tomorrow a Home Minister of India makes a call to two of you, Junaid ji and Aarti ji, and asks you, can you give me 4 or 5 steps which need to be taken? What would be, in your view, the roadmap for rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits in a secured fashion back to their homeland, Kashmir? First, Junaid ji.
I feel the roadmap cannot be made unless, consultation process is started on a large scale. And, the need is to make a list of people who want to return and then bring them in contact to the areas they belong to, or want to move to using the panchayat setup. This is one aspect of it. And then the another aspect of it is, we need a sincere and political vibrant leadership who is sincere to this particular cause, because our old political establishment, they have always exploited the particular issue by just for their vote buying politics. But I trust me, our people and our political party, we are very serious about this particular issue, that we want our Pandit brethren back to Valley. कुछ भी करना पड़ेगा हमें, like हम घर घर जाएंगे उनके पास और उनको मतलब समझाएंगे, जितना हमारे से होगा उतना हम उनके लिए करेंगे. और you see, there are a lot of things. It's not just one thing. Lots of issues are there. So, but I believe, it can be only done, through a political sincere leadership. And for that, we all need to come together, through these webinars and seminars. We can build up a collective conscience, and then a roadmap can be built on. It cannot be built upon this, with a single webinar. I believe we must continue with these programs so that we can come up with a lot of suggestions. My one suggestion will not matter, and Aartiji's another suggestion will not matter. But we need to get more people on board, where जहाँ में एक सजेशन बहुत सोच समझ के रोड मैप के जरिए लोगों तक लाने की जरूरत है. And for that we need to work together. All of us need to work together for better and new Kashmir.
Thank you for that. I think you really stressed on the very thought process behind this civil society dialogue that we started, and which we are doing at a global level. And this is precisely why we're thinking that issues are not to be dominated by all dynastic politicians or the jihadi elements who hijack the issue. This has to be discussed at a grassroots level, at a civil level, because it's the general population who's affected. It's their children who are affected. And I think one of the things which I want to kind of stress on, which I think I can share with you, Mir Junaid, particularly, is that you might have marked one thing that, contrary to what Bollywood movies will tell you, that people become terrorists when they are denied some rights, or if they are not given unfairly treated. Imagine that hypothesis, that theory. Now, and then contrast with the fact that Kashmiri Pandits have been raped, murdered, and have a genocide and exodus from their own homeland. Yet I have still not seen one single Kashmiri Pandit become a terrorist. There is something to that. One. The second part is to this issue is where I want to draw you a little bit more on this one. I just wanted to kind of know from you, how do you look at some of the political circles in Kashmir who seem to be a great fan of turning the clock back. In other words, back to restoration of Article 370, 35A and all that, and trying to somehow link it with pride of Kashmir. So can you share your take on some of those arguments or some of those things that are happening with at least certain circles in Kashmir? Junaid, for you.
Yes, see, sir, Jivan, sir, you know, when we talk about the old political establishment of Kashmir, their role in power was only, misgovernance and embezzlement of funds from the center. And the role in opposition was to stir public emotion and give legitimacy to the feeling of separatism and treason. We have been dealing with the nexus of political pluralism in Kashmir, where the political mafia kept on deceiving the masses by charging them criminally on one side, and on the other side asking for money for development from, a center. You see, the corrupt machinery drove away the people from public offices, and democracy was used to just play, musical chairs with the seats of power between the two families. These families had defined roles when in power and opposition. And then the other part of it is, the our neighboring country, Pakistan. They have always used its proxies quite smartly over almost 30 years by, choreographing one of the most brutal insurgencies in the valley. Through its policies, Pakistan was first able to strip Kashmir of its harmonious and plural uh, demographic composition. And one of the most inhuman mass exodus happened on the orders of Pakistan to the proxies in Kashmir. And we are, you know, discussing that part today. And I tell you very honestly, like when Jivan sir said that uh, the Pandits were raped, they were brutally killed, there's no doubt in that. And I have been a very vocal voice about these things through my articles, through my speech, wherever I find platform, I speak. And I tell you with honest to God, in order to, expose the reality of Pakistan, recently, we on 22nd October 2020, we organized a Black Day observance in Kashmir. And this was the first ever such happening in the last long history of 70 years in Kashmir. We organized a car rally in protest against Pakistan and its policies with respect to JNK. And we also had organized a symposium, in memories of the attacks of 1947 by Pakistan. Even then, we went for a protest march against Pakistan to the UN office in Srinagar, where we presented the war crime memorandum against Pakistan, demanding the rest of J&K back from Pakistan, which is legal and rightful part of India. Simultaneously, when I share a platform like this, where all the eminent personalities from across India and different parts of the globe are present, I always try to speak my heart out. I always try to give a genuine opinion. Without bias, without, and any malice in my heart. So I believe, for all this mess, our political establishment, our old political establishment is responsible for all this, because, when in power, they have always been, praising Mother India. But when out of power, they have always been cursing Mother India, and they have always been riding two horses. One horse they were riding, you know, in the name of Pakistan, and then another horse they were riding in the name of India. But I believe this present political dispensation their stand is clear, which I perceive from their, what they are doing on the ground. The first thing is either you be with this country or you be with that country, and whosoever is not with this country, I think, you know वो अपने कर्मों का जो है कि हल जो है कि अपने कर्मों का फल खा रहे हैं अभी. बट मतलब हम सब ने इस चीज को लेके बात भी करनी होगी. आई मीन मतलब हर जगह पे जहां जहां भी हमें मौका मिलेगा, दैट आई मीन न्यू दिल्ली शुड even not repeat the same thing what they have experimented in the past. I mean, they have tested the waters, they have tried them for almost last 40 years, and they were never bothered about Pandit Brethren return. They were never bothered about the rehabilitation policy. They were never sincere about the Kashmiri Pandit exhorts, because uh, वो बोलते भी कैसे, क्योंकि उनका धंधा इस चीज से चलता था. अब मुझे लगता है कि आई मीन ये धंधा किसी हद तक 370 और 35 के बाद बंद हो गया, और एक नई लीडरशिप को पनपने का मौका दिया जाना चाहिए. एंड what has been tested earlier, it should not be repeated again, because it's like selling uh, old wine in new bottles. That should not happen again. And when Prime Minister on the ramparts of Lal Killa clearly said that we will bring clean, accountable, honest, and vibrant leadership to Jammu and Kashmir. But like, on a policy side of it, on a political side of it, things are somehow, I see, going wrong, because when Prime Minister is saying we'll bring clean, accountable, honest leadership to Kashmir, I would bit disturbed when I see, people engaging again with the old political establishment. What are their policies? How they are going to rehabilitate Pandits back? How they are going to ensure their return to the valley back? Because अगर उनको करना था तो they were in power for many years. किया क्यों नहीं तब तक? और आज इन लोगों से अगर हम कोई तवक्का रखेंगे तो मुझे लगता है कि वो हमारी सबसे बड़ी बेवकूफ़ी होगी. और पहले आई थिंक हमें एक पॉलिटिकल सेटअप एक नए पॉलिटिकल सेटअप को मजबूत करने की जरूरत हो, जो बिल्कुल सिंसियर हो, जो बिल्कुल नेशनलिस्ट लोग हो, और जिनको मतलब कोई पर्सनल एजेंडा नहीं हो, जिनको सच में मतलब जो सच में लोगों का भला चाहते हैं, जो इंसानियत का भला चाहते हैं. उसमें सब लोग आते हैं, उसमें कोई धर्म मतलब है ही नहीं. मतलब जो भी हो, हर किसी का इंसान भला करना चाहिए, और उस लीडरशिप की कश्मीर को जरूरत है. न कि कभी हिंदू एग्जॉडस को लेके सियासत करेंगे, कभी किसी चीज को लेके सियासत करेंगे. अब बहुत हो गया, 30 साल बहुत जेल चुके हैं हम, 30 साल बहुत तंग आ चुके हैं. बट जब भी कभी मौका मिलता है आप जैसे जी इज्जत शहरियों के साथ, जी इज्जत लोगों के साथ बात करने का, तो मतलब हम अपनी बात पूरी रखने की कोशिश करते हैं. और मैं बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ आप सबका. आज आपने मुझे फिर से आपसे रूबरू होने का मौका दिया.
Thank you for that. I want to move to the other issue, which is with regard to, which is not being talked about a great deal, but which is, I think, important. I think this would be my question to Aarti Tikku Singh. So, Aarti, what do you feel with regard to the problem, which is with regard to those brave Kashmiri families, few hundreds of them, who stayed back in Kashmir? And we often hear that the hardships that they have been facing back in the valley, and almost a deaf ear that they have so far received from first with the state government and now with the current lieutenant governor. So could you just elaborate on what do you think are the reasons why have those issues not been able to be addressed? Is it a bureaucracy problem, or is there a lack of a kind of a firm, action-oriented kind of mindset of the Lieutenant Governor? What are the issues? Why do you think those hardships of those families has not been addressed so far? Aarti. Hello.
Aarti, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. Aarti, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. But before I respond to this question, I want to briefly mention, in fact, that was the question you had originally asked me and Junaid about rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits. And I think as a displaced Kashmiri Pandit, refugee, I think I do have a stake, and as an observer of Kashmir affairs and international affairs, and as also a journalist who's worked on Kashmir for last 2 decades, I think I have some sense and some idea of what has really gone right in the last 1 year in that can facilitate the return and rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits, and what really needs to be done to finally formalize this dream. The two things that really have gone well are the two amendments that the Home Ministry in New Delhi has brought. One is related to the domicile certificate, of which I am a beneficiary. I did finally get my domicile certificate, which not only recognized me as a domicile of Jammu and Kashmir, because at one stage, in fact, until the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir and nullification of 35A, women who married non-state subjects of Jammu and Kashmir used to get disqualified as citizens, as state subjects of J&K. Until 2001, 2002, when the High Court did reverse it partially to the extent that women, were not disqualified even if they were married to non-state subjects. But that was only a partial justice to the issue. The other part of the story was that women who had married non-state subjects, their children were deprived of their rights as state subjects or as children of the state subjects, which meant that they could not inherit their parents' properties, they could not avail any of the facilities, avail any of the privileges of being a state subject of Jammu and Kashmir. So that has been reversed because of the Home Ministry's amendment, which got me the domicile certificate and also recognized me as a displaced Kashmiri Pandit. The other good thing that has happened is the amendment in the land laws of Jammu and Kashmir. And Jammu and Kashmir has finally been opened up to the rest of the country, as the rest of the country was open to the residents or the state subjects of Jammu and Kashmir in the last 70 years. In every big city of India, there is a little Kashmir settled and established and thriving, with Kashmiri Muslims, traders, having a great life and having, bringing a lot of prosperity to their own society back home in Kashmir. So that is, I think these two things are really good, and they will pave the way for return and rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits. For that, we must be thankful to the government of India. But from here on, I think the road is going to be a bit more challenging. As I did mention in my earlier comments, that unless there is some kind of reconciliation between Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims, I think the challenge will remain there, because at the end of the day, even though there is, as in fact Surenderji was mentioning, even though there is territorial integrity between Jammu and Kashmir and the rest of India, there is still a gap. And I would say that, there is, I would say that there is some deficiency or inadequacy in the emotional integrity between Kashmir and the rest of India. It should not have happened, because the rest of India has opened its arms to Kashmiri Muslims as well as displaced Kashmiri Pandits, like other citizens of this country. But the kind of narrative that was fed in the last 30 years, not just by Pakistan, by the way, not just by the Pakistani machinery in Kashmir, but also by the mainstream media in New Delhi, by also the intelligentsia and the intellectuals of New Delhi, who fed the whole idea. In 1947, Jammu and Kashmir became part of India, integral part of India in 1950 when we became a republic. And from that moment, we came to a point, because of the false narratives peddled by the mainstream media and intelligentsia of India, that India became an oppressor and an occupier in Kashmir and not Pakistan. So that is the shame that we experienced, we lived, we suffered, and we endured. That is why I'm saying that this is going to be challenging, because if you really want to bring the emotional integrity between Kashmir and the rest of India, then we need to work on something else, and which is essentially the reversal of the narrative that has set in Kashmir in the last 30 years. But at the same time, I have to say that it is a bit late for any civil society, whether it's in Srinagar or Kashmir or in the rest of India, to now counter it and reverse it just by the means of, say, expressing your opinions. I think the state will have to intervene. The state will have to do a course correction, because the state itself was responsible for allowing this narrative to set in. The state will have to intervene by acknowledging, by recognizing that there was a genocide, that there has been a genocide of Kashmiri Pandits in not only in 1990, but through several decades, several centuries. And that genocide, that ethnic cleansing of indigenous people of Kashmir needs to be recognized through legislation, needs to be recognized through constitution, and it needs to be also course corrected, which means it has to be treated almost at par with, say, the kind of affirmative action we have, or the recognition of the fact that Dalits, for example, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes who have been discriminated against, there has been a course correction from the state through the constitution, and that is why we have not only the recognition of the fact that they were discriminated against, but they also were provided affirmative action. Now, I'm not asking for affirmative action for Kashmiri Hindus, but I'm saying that the state will have to recognize it. The state will have to also ensure that there is a penalty for any repetition of ethnic cleansing. That is why I think the anti-genocide bill is necessary. It is important not only for, I would say, Kashmiri Pandits, but also for the overall social fabric of India. India is a pluralistic country. India is diverse. India is rich in its history. India is a civilization. For a civilization to move ahead and thrive, it must deal with its truths as honestly as one can. And the first truth that we need to accept, not only as a society, but as a state, is that ethnic cleansing, genocide of Kashmiri Pandits did happen over centuries. So there has to be a course correction. Apart from that, I think the second question that you asked me about the Kashmiri Pandits who stayed back in the valley. I have to say that, very little has been written about them, very little attention has been paid to the plight of Kashmiri Pandits who stayed back and who suffered and endured a lot of oppression in the last 30 years. I have written about it because I did visit, Kashmir regularly, starting 2001, 2002. After a gap of 12 years, I had left as a 12-year-old kid and I went back as a professional journalist. And I did meet Kashmiri Pandits who stayed back and also endured some of the massacres long after the exodus happened. And I have to say that in the last 30 years, if Kashmiri Pandit refugees who got displaced and who got scattered, not only across India, but abroad as well, Kashmiri Pandits who stayed back equally suffered a similar fate, because there have been surveys and there have been studies on the Kashmiri Pandits. It's only, I think, 2,500 Kashmiri Pandits who remained there at the end of the day. Their own identity crisis is as enormous as the identity crisis of displaced Kashmiri Pandits who tried to assimilate in the rest of India and tried to mix up with other Hindus of India. Their identity crisis in an extremely Muslim, heterogeneous, not heterogeneous, but homogeneous society, where Muslim majoritarianism took a violent mode because of the Pakistan-backed terrorism and Pakistan-backed separatism. The identity crisis of Kashmiri Pandits took a major hit. Not only that, but also the fact that Kashmiri Pandits who stayed back not only could, had to live in fear constantly to survive in an extremely homogeneous society where the rule of the gun, AK-47s were in fact were a common sight in Kashmir in the 90s, even in early 2000s when I went back to Kashmir as a journalist. For them to survive in that atmosphere has taken a huge toll, not just emotionally, but also physically, also as a community. And the other aspect is the economic aspect of Kashmiri Pandits. While the rest of society, because a lot of conflict economy is a different subject altogether, and I have written extensively on that. While the rest of society in Kashmir, in fact, if you go to Srinagar, if you see urban parts of Srinagar, suburban parts of.
Yeah, I had to mention quickly. We are having the last few minutes for the session, so
yeah. So I'm going to quickly wrap it up. I'm saying that that Kashmiri Pandits who stayed back have economically also suffered. Their children did not have the same, I would say, compensation as Kashmiri Pandit refugees did. We did have some kind of reservation for our children in colleges and universities, but they did not have the same facilities and same, I would say, compensation or relief. They did not have the relief that refugees got. But I think, there are administrative issues. I would hold the bureaucracy of Kashmir responsible for completely neglecting the Kashmiri Pandits who stayed back. I think that's one area where the BJP government in Delhi really needs to pay attention to. With that, I thank you for giving me so much time and this platform to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think we are reaching towards the end of the session, but I have a couple of points which I want to touch upon. First with Jivanji and second with Ayub Mirza. Very briefly. I think Jivanji, could you very briefly, because we have very little time left, could you touch upon about this idea which has come up in this, that there has to be a certain kind of a legislative recognition of genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. So could you just share very briefly your take on that? Jivanji, are you unmute now?
Jivanji, unmute yourself.
Let me unmute myself. Sorry.
Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
think it's extremely important to do that, because unless there is recognition, of genocide, I don't know how things can move forward. But also, I would definitely like to add here, RTG has, said, so much about, all the Kashmiris who are in Kashmir right now and how they have suffered. And I strongly believe that the root cause of the problem that I have seen is Pakistan, and also, as was just mentioned by some of the speakers, it's also our intellectuals, our people who have made this problem extremely difficult for the civil society or for the government or for anyone to deal with. So I think I strongly believe that we must address those issues, how we can be able to tackle, the enemies of India, Pakistan, particularly, because I always have seen Pakistan as the root cause of the problem, and that's where everything, the mullah culture and indoctrination, and our youth and everything, were basically led astray, and also our own local government. And now they're busy with Gupkar declaration and all that. I think those are the people also who are responsible. So I think there are multiple, I see multiple things which need to be done. And of course, the genocide of Kashmiri Pandits is definitely, to answer your question, I think that is definitely something that that has to be recognized, and the government has to do that.
Thank you so much, Jivanji. I think I was taking notes of some of the major points here. Before I end with the last question to Mirza Ayub, one of the things which is emerging, I think a consensus over here is that there is a need for a legislative recognition of Kashmiri Pandit genocide. The other is kind of emerging as a consensus here is that there has to be certain kind of truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was initially first touched upon by Dr. Amjad Ayub Mirza as one of the ideas by that. And I think one of the points with Surendraji, in which I think Junaid and RTG, all of you guys have touched upon, is that beyond the national integration, there is a need for that emotional integration between the communities. And that goes much deeper. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that this paradigm shift has to happen. And I think Kashmiri Muslims have a larger part to play in that, which means that it is really hurtful. It is really, when I see a young infant or a child, Muslim child, whether it's in India or in Kashmir, who unfortunately is being, not in all cases, but in some extreme cases, whether it's through madrasa or anything else, if he's started teaching hate to that child from the beginning, that anybody other than Muslim is your somehow a monster for you. And I think it really hurts me because that child has a future. That child has to live a life, a very high, as I mentioned earlier, a highly competitive world, a science and technology-driven world, information revolution-driven world, a highly complex economic world. That's where they have to live. And I really cherish the dream that every Muslim child in Kashmir, or rest of India for that matter, should be part of that dream, which means that there has to be a paradigm shift in terms of how one either uses religion or is misinterprets religion, that it has to be always me versus them. And I think that goes to the wider question about this emotional integration. And also what I heard, I think again, a consensus here is that government of India has to continue to take strong measures to combat Islamic terrorism in Kashmir and to deal with Pakistan's explosive terrorism. I think that is something which all of us have agreed. So before I close the session, I want to give a kind of last word I wanted to give to Amjad Ayub Mirza, because he didn't speak for that long time, which is I have got last few minutes left now. I think I wanted to touch upon with him that Islamic terrorism is now a kind of global problem. We know France, we know Europe, we know US, we know Kashmir, India, why not? And of course, not to neglect the fact that what we call occupied Jammu and Kashmir region. So if there was for, this question is for Amjad Ayub Mirza, if you were asked to give us a kind of just 2 or 3 points about how do you think internationally as well as in your region, particularly this menace of Islamic terrorism, which of course is a kind of scar on the humanities overall, and it cannot be a really legitimate means of solving any problems, whether political or geographical. So what do you think should be 1 or 2, just a couple of points which you think you can summarize of how the world in general and how Indian government should deal with terrorism?
You mean how Indian government should deal with terrorism?
Both Indian. Let's start with Indian government. How do you think Indian government should deal with the menace of Islamic terrorism?
Well, Indian government should immediately start planning for preemptive strikes on the terrorist camps in POJK. That there's no question in my mind about that. And if the need be, we should move our troops straight into Mirpur, straight into Muzaffarabad. If they want war, then we give them war. That is my simple answer. Diplomacy has failed. Sanctions have failed. Now the only thing is the threat of war, and we had a good Diwali a few days ago on the line of control, and we have smashed a lot of their posts. So that is the only solution. Next question.
Thank you. I think that's what I really wanted to hear from you. I think that.
But I want to say something as well.
Sure.
Say something as well.
Go ahead.
Regarding the Kashmiri Pandit issue. So that is why this webinar was held. First of all, Kaul Saab said that so much violence was done against the Kashmiri Pandits, but nobody turned into a terrorist. Now, I think that there are 2 types of people who pick up guns. One is the one who is a terrorist or who wants to subdue you, and the other is the person who wants to defend himself or herself. So, in both cases, you cannot fight against an armed militia, against a terrorist organization with webinars, with statements, with appealing to the Indian government to do something until and unless we start to learn how to counter these people. Now, what is happening in Kashmir? The old order is dead or dying, but the new has yet to be born. The birth pangs of this new Kashmir can be felt. They can be felt, but it all now comes down to the midwife. The midwife has to deliver this baby. And who is the midwife of this new Kashmir that is being born? It is the Muslims and the Kashmiri Pandits together. They are the midwives. Agar to ye midwife akal se kaam legi, or if this midwife knows how to how to help the birth of this new Kashmir, how to facilitate it, then this new Kashmir will be born. Otherwise, this new Kashmir, before even it borns, will be a stillbirth. It will go into more chaos. And again, I would say, and I'll end on this, that until and unless the root cause, as Jeevan ji also mentioned, Pakistan is dealt with, ye masla hal nahi hoga. We, Indian government, of course, this genocide, it should be legislative recognition of the Kashmiri Pandit genocide. But how are we going to pressurize Indian government to announce this legally through Supreme Court until and unless we have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, until we have a report, until we have a campaign. मैं जाता हूँ ना Geneva. Where is Kashmiri Pandit in Geneva during the UNHRC Commission? Yeah, there is no representative of the Kashmiri Pandits there. And last time I did speak about Kashmiri Pandit just in passing. Why should I speak about Kashmiri Pandits as United Nations Human Rights Commission? I'm not a Kashmiri Pandit. So that means that there's a failure on the part of Kashmiri Pandit diaspora. You should get engaged with NGOs that could facilitate. I can facilitate you if you want. I can do that for you. I can get you into the United Nations Human Rights Council March session is coming up. I can try and facilitate. You send a speaker and you yourself present your case. Why should a third party present your case? So, number one, eliminate these terrorist camps. ये डायलॉग से नहीं जाएगा. एक ने हाथ में बंदूक लिया है, वो डायलॉग से नहीं जाएगा. वो क्यों आपकी बात माने जब आप ऐसे करके बैठे हो सर झुका के. Number two, you should have a representative in March at UNHRC. I will do whatever I can to help your organization or whoever you suggest to get there and talk, present your case. It is very powerful forum, and you should have a representative there. Thank you very much.
Mohanji, can I make a statement, Mohanji, if you, with your permission?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Amjad Saab raised a very pertinent point. It's not true, Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora is in touch with many NGOs in United Nations. And actually in March 2019, we were scheduled to make a presentation at UNHRC session, but that got postponed, that got canceled because of COVID. So we are on this, we are in touch with a lot of NGOs, and there's a work in progress. And actually, Mohanji, Junaid Saab has said that he wanted to conclude by 1 minute. So can you please give him 1 minute to speak?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to make this interjection because Amjad Saab raised this point.
Thank you for that clarification. Junaid, you're on. Please go ahead.
Sir, thank you for giving me a chance because I forgot to say something and it came all of a sudden in my mind because I was listening carefully to all the panelists. And you see, sir, there was this discourse which was going on, which I have been hearing for quite a long time about separate colonies for the Kashmiri Pandits. Sir, I said separate colonies, it might be a proposition, but when we talk about inclusive Kashmir, we must envision it through the idea of living together with each other. And you see, sir, then Jeevan Saab had asked certain questions that like 5 points. I was trying to just see how I can put these 5 points before you. And one of them is like Arteji said, the government need to also compensate the people who were looted when they left so that, they can afford the resettlement. That's very important. And that should be our prime focus for the rehabilitation of Pandits. The second thing is the sense of security. It needs to be created for building confidence among people to return to their homeland. Then, the whole discussion, it reminded me of my article, which I have written about the Pandit exorts, which was, well thought conspiracy by Pakistan. And sir, there are certain things which we all need to answer together. You see, sir, I have written there, in my article, that one line: who will answer as to why this tragic event of Kashmiri Pandits happened? It was never discussed in the parliament, and there was no inquiry commission just to find, why it happened. And, Pandits were made to flee. Who were its masterminds? And one thing that's always strike my mind is, why the former Prime Minister of the country, VP Singh, said when Mufti Muhammad Said called him that Pandits are leaving valley, and VP Singh said, "Who Pandits?" This is always it which strikes my mind time and again. And sir, and then another thing, which I believe personally, that Pandits may not say it openly, but the fact of their disillusionment with Indian Union cannot be denied. So This is what I wrote in an article. So can it be said that at the end of 30 years, the Muslims are disillusioned with the Pakistan and Pandits with India? And unless answers to the above question are not found, there may never be a true remedy to the trauma of Kashmiri Pandits in Kashmir. This is always striking time and again in my mind. And first thing what strikes my mind is like when Mufti said then, the Home Minister of country called uh, then Prime Minister, he called him that, Sir, Pandits Kashmir se nikal rahe hain. And VP Singh said, who Pandits? Why he said who Pandits? क्यों कहा उसने? इस चीज का सर हमें जवाब भी ढूंढना पड़ेगा.
Right.
ये चीज
Mohanji,
मेरे दिमाग में हमेशा गूंजती रहती है जब मैं इन चीजों को बारीकी से देखता हूँ.
Mohanji, can I make a statement, Junaid sir,
Please,
with your
go
permission?
ahead. Yeah.
First
By
of
the
all,
way,
yeah.
we got some extra minutes because I'm getting a lot of feedback from the audience. They are loving the discussion, so you will extend by a few minutes. Please go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, let me be very honest, Junaid Saab and other panelists. I reiterate that really feel a ray of hope, Junaid Bhai, after listening to you. That is how it has to be. Few clarifications. First you use that why should Kashmiri Pandit live in colonies and not with Kashmiri Muslims because they're part and parcel of the fabric of Kashmir. That is true. I wish, Junaid Saab, let us be very honest. If there are people like Junaid Saab, that's what we want. We want to live with people like you who believe in coexistence, who believe in mutual respect, who believe in the rule of law. So please don't take us otherwise. When we say that one place settlement doesn't mean that all Hindus should be put together. One place settlement, when we say that sabun ko agar bhejna hi hai, now with Muslims, like all those who believe in the Indian constitution, the coexistence, the spirituality of Kashmir with Muslims, with Sikhs, that is the part of it. So it's not that we want to stay in colonies. We want to stay with all of our Muslims who believe in those values. So that's one clarification. So we're not asking for a Hindu land. We want to participate in the growth and development of the place with Muslims. But the caveat is that those people like you, we always respect them. Definitely, you need to understand our perspective that if we have radical people, it will take them another 1 month to finish us off again. Let's be honest on that. So just that was number one clarification I wanted to bring in with all sensitivity it deserves. Secondly, you mentioned about Mufti Said. You are absolutely right, and thanks for bringing it up honestly and boldly. And you are speaking this language from Kashmir. And that is something that all the audience needs to appreciate, keeping in view all the sensitivities. You are making these statements, and that is true. These politicians, ये politicians किसी के नहीं रहे, ना मुस्लिम्स के, ना शिया के, ना गुज्जर के, ना कश्मीरी पंडित्स के, ना दलित्स के, इन्होंने बर्बाद करके रखा कश्मीर को. And now this whole deja vu, again the same thing they are parroting, and before they bleed Kashmir to another period of death, the civil society has to get up. Shun this, stay away from. We don't have to put religion on our sleeves. Let us focus on governance. Let us focus on employment for everyone. Industrialization. Let's see that health and everything, everybody is taken care of. Education is taken care of. These are the basic requirement of any human being, and they have the right for that. So I just wanted to make this interjection. Back to you.
Thank you. I just want to end this one with, I think, because this was raised by some panelists. I think we want to clarify here that the whole purpose of a civil dialogue at a global level is not to substitute for other means which need to be adopted, which in other words means they are not being mutually exclusive. Because like many things in life, Kashmir issue is multidimensional, and it has to be obviously dealt with at different levels. One level, of course, is there's no denial of the fact that government of India has to continue crushing Islamic terrorism in Kashmir if they have to have a future for Kashmir, and also for the welfare of everybody in Kashmir. They have to fight it out, whether it means within the boundaries of the country or maybe in some cases even beyond. I think that's the war that has to be fought, is being fought. But I think what we are trying to do at a civil society level is that we are trying to figure out that there has to be a certain broader consensus among the people, first of all, in terms of emotional integration, which is so important for the return of Kashmiri Pandits to that. And more importantly, some of the points which I think this has been, by the way, in my view, at least one of the most productive virtual conferences I have been part of, that I am seeing here as an emergence of a convergence of ideas that there is a need for having a legislative recognition of genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. There has to be a truth of reconciliation kind of commission to get into what happened and who need to be punished and what really happened in the process, because we still don't have justice for the victims of the genocide. Then I'm also hearing a lot of basically ideas that there has to be a kind of integration of mindsets and a paradigm shift which needs to happen. And I think all of this is really helped by us, the civil society. And I am really grateful to all the panelists here, grateful to the audience who have tuned in from different parts of the world. And I want to thank you once again for all of you.
Mohanji, sorry to interrupt again. Actually, Junaid Saab has some more information. I like that. I don't want to stop. He wants to speak. Yes, speak. We are here to hear you. Yeah, he wants to make another point.
Please go ahead. We will.
Sir, one more important thing, sir.
Yeah.
You see, sir, in last 30 years, only 2 prime ministers visited the camps of the Kashmiri Pandits who migrated from Kashmir to the rest of India. Only 2. One was Shri I.K. Gujral and unki government that lasted only for a few months. The second one was Manmohan Singh ji, who almost spent his tenure, I believe, in the service of the High Command. And I think, it's a right time for our Prime Minister, the current dispensation Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, to visit himself to these migrant camps and to listen to them, so that some decision will come from the top and kuch na kuch tab jaake hoga, kyunki it was this present dispensation who took a very bold step that no, article need to be abrogated, and they abrogated it. And this is again a very important thing. If the current Prime Minister will visit the Kashmiri migrant camps, that will be one of the wonderful developments, and we must all focus on it. जितने भी panelists हैं, हमें इस पे बहुत ध्यान देने की जरूरत है. तब जाके सर कुछ होगा. Seriously.
Thank you.
Very well
One
said.
more thing I wanted to bring in, Junaid Saab, that as Kashmiri Pandits, we are not disillusioned with India. Yes, we had a lot of expectations from India, what they will do the right thing, but definitely, yes, we are upset about the whole political configuration of India, but we are not disillusioned with India. We are patriotic as Indians, as you are. So, but yes, we have certain aspirations. We had expectations, and successive governments failed us. That I wanted to make. Now, come for your conclusion. Maybe Aarti has something to say. You are mute. You are mute. You are mute, Aarti. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I actually think that Junaid made a very significant point when he said that Kashmiri Muslims were disillusioned by Pakistan or got disappointed by Pakistan, and Kashmiri Pandits were have been disillusioned by India. I don't think he meant in terms of India as an idea, India as a secular democracy. But I think he did mean by the people, by the dispensations that inherited power from the British colonialists who left in 1947. The dispensations in New Delhi, and I don't think it is. It's just the Congress Party. It's also during the we know that during Vajpayee government, we saw how PDP emerged and how it became, it sort of, soft separatism in a way got mainstreamed in not just in Kashmir, but the rest of India also. We also remember that whether it was Narasimha Rao, who is seen, I would say, more nationalistic or more center-right than his successors within the Congress party. Even he failed in many ways when it came to the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits or their rehabilitation. So in one sense, I think Junaid did make a very significant point that the old dispensation, in a way, the inheritors of the British colonial system, whether it's in India, whether it's in New Delhi, or whether it's in Islamabad, because at the end of the day, do remember that Pakistan is an artificial construct. Pakistan was put together by the British to contain the Russian influence, the Soviet, not Russian, but the Soviet influence in the region. And they did not trust Nehru to keep a check on Soviet Union influence, and that is why Pakistan army got a state to itself, so that the British could continue its influence in the region, the Great Game Theory. So from that perspective, I would say that yes, Kashmiri Muslims, I think they were running after a chimera of Islamic Republic, of Islamic State, of having, Nizam-e-Mustafa. And Kashmiri Pandits who really believed or trusted Nehru-Gandhi leadership, or trusted the other political parties of India, they did let them down. So both communities, in a way, have been disillusioned. And I think if there is a certain introspection within Kashmiri society, both Muslims and Pandits, they would today understand that that they invested in I would say in the wrong parties. And I think we we are at a very critical moment in history today. I think our hope is me, Junaid, and people like him in Kashmir. I think once we have our votes for the next elections, I think we know whom to elect in Kashmir. Thank you.
Thank you, Aarti, for that. I must mention here that Kashmiri diaspora worldwide is extremely appreciative and thankful to the historic and bold decisions that were taken by the current government with regard to abrogation of Article 370, 35A, and some of the recent changes made in other laws, including domicile laws. I think that is to be really recognized. I think what this civil society conversation and dialogue is really trying to do is to develop a kind of a consensus, at least among that, in terms of what really needs to be done. And I think one of the things which I think I would say civil society in general is eagerly looking at, or Kashmiri diaspora is looking at, is as to what does the Lieutenant Governor of J&K really do in concrete terms to address the problems of Kashmiri Hindus who have stayed back in the valley. I don't think there is any excuse for not being able to take action to address that. I think the world is watching, the Kashmiri diaspora is watching, the civil society is watching. And thinking along with that also is a kind of an appeal by the diaspora to the Home Minister of India that there are so many stakeholders to this issue. And I think there has to be a certain degree of, there's a scope for having some input come from some of these stakeholders while they devise a kind of roadmap for the safe return of Kashmiri Hindus to the valley. And the idea there is that the return cannot happen under a circumstance where they can become a sitting duck there under the gun of jihadis. But there has to be a kind of more comprehensive, well thought of plan, a roadmap towards that. And I think some of the ideas which got discussed here, whether it's in terms of recognition of genocide, whether it's in terms of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, whether it's in terms of, by the way, we didn't talk much about restoration of shrines of KPs and temples in that is part of their safe return. And the other idea is in terms of what Junaid ji discussed so well, so beautifully, and Jeevan ji touched upon it in the beginning, is in terms of integration, not only in terms of physical integration, but integration of minds, integration of that emotional connect that has to develop. Thank you so much. I know we have gone a little few minutes away, but I just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. I think you have been wonderful. I just want to thank you all, this wonderful panelists. And I think this has been one of the most informative and exciting session for me, which I moderated across different topics. It has been one of the most exciting for me. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Bye.